He was humiliated in front of a crowd for wearing a red MAGA hat, but the police officer had no idea that the man before him was his boss. What happened next turned everything upside down. Officer Mike Carter was wrapping up his shift. The clock on the dashboard of his patrol car read 6:45 p.m., and his thoughts were already drifting to the dinner waiting for him at home. In the parking lot of a supermarket, he noticed a man leisurely loading groceries from a shopping cart into the trunk of his car. Mike might have driven past without a second thought, but the red cap with the words, "Make America Great Again," immediately caught his attention, like a flashing warning light. Mike frowned. To him, that hat was more than just a piece of clothing. It symbolized division, conflict, and everything he considered to be the problems of society. He opened the car door, grabbed his tablet, and walked toward the man. The stranger, paying no attention to Mike, continued carefully arranging groceries in his trunk. "Sir," Mike began, stopping beside him. His voice was dry and formal. "Do you understand that your hat could offend other people?" The man looked up, meeting Mike's gaze with a calm expression and a slight smile. "Good evening, officer. It's just a hat." The response unsettled Mike. He was used to respect, not subtle irony. "It's more than just a hat," Mike retorted, scanning the man's car with his eyes. "And besides, your vehicle is parked illegally." The man didn't argue. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his documents, and handed them to the officer, his smile unwavering. "Of course. I hope this isn't personal," he remarked calmly. "Just doing my job," Mike snapped, barely glancing at the documents. By this time, onlookers had started to gather. A few people stood on the edge of the sidewalk, and someone discreetly took out their phone to record the interaction. The atmosphere grew tense, like the calm before a storm. "This is turning into an interesting day," the man said, observing Mike's reaction. The officer began writing up a ticket when a voice called out from the small crowd. "Seriously? A ticket for a hat?" Mike tensed but ignored the comment. He was confident he was doing the right thing. It never crossed his mind that this seemingly ordinary man might be someone far more influential than he could imagine. The confrontation appeared to be just beginning, and none of the witnesses could have guessed how shockingly this story would end. Officer Mike Carter, feeling the weight of the crowd's attention, squared his shoulders and tried to project an air of maximum seriousness. The parking lot was turning into a stage. A few people had stopped to watch, and some were already holding their phones at the ready, hoping to capture a moment worth sharing. The man in the red cap seemed oblivious to the growing audience. He carefully slipped his documents back into his pocket and tilted his head slightly before asking, "Officer, are you sure you're acting within the law?" The calm tone of the question struck a nerve with Mike. To him, it felt like a challenge, an affront to his authority. His brow furrowed, and his reply came out as a near growl. "Absolutely sure. You'd do well to think about the consequences of your actions." The murmurs among the small crowd grew louder. A young man in a t-shirt with a local college logo remarked, loud enough for others to hear, "The guy's just wearing a hat. Is that illegal now?" But Mike pretended not to hear. The man in the red cap raised his eyes to the officer again, his expression remaining calm and almost friendly. "You know," he said, as though thinking out loud, "I've always believed the role of the police is to protect citizens, not punish them for their choice of hats." Mike's face flushed. "You're in no position to tell me how to do my job," he snapped, his voice louder than he intended, making a few bystanders take a cautious step back. At that moment, someone from the crowd chimed in. "Officer, can you tell us what law he's breaking?" a man in glasses asked, holding up his phone to record the interaction. The crowd began to grin. Some even chuckled quietly. Mike shot a sharp glance in the direction of the voice, but said nothing, determined to focus on the culprit in front of him. The man in the red cap, meanwhile, accepted the ticket without complaint, gave it a quick glance, and commented, "This is impressive, I must say. It's remarkable how even a supermarket parking lot can become the scene of something unexpected." His gaze returned to Mike, and for a moment there was something in his eyes. Not aggression, but a quiet confidence that bordered on playful amusement. It was enough to make Mike feel a flicker of discomfort. Just then, someone in the crowd called out loudly, "Do you even know who this guy is?" The voice carried an air of intrigue, as though the speaker knew something the rest of the onlookers didn't. Mike brushed it off, refusing to be distracted. But the tension in the air had shifted. There was now a palpable sense that the situation was headed in a direction no one had anticipated. After a few moments of silence, broken only by the sound of an approaching engine, a sleek black SUV with tinted windows glided smoothly into the parking lot. The vehicle stopped as if it didn't want to disturb the air. The door opened, and several men stepped out. Their sharp suits and stoic expressions gave off an air of authority so commanding, it felt like they could order time itself to slow down. One of the men strode over to the man in the red cap, who, until this moment, had exuded confidence. Now, he looked like he wanted to disappear into the asphalt. "Is everything all right, sir?" the newcomer asked, his tone a mix of concern and professionalism. Mike, standing nearby, felt a jolt of unease. Something about the situation was off, but he couldn't quite piece it together. The man in the cap gave a slight nod, as if the question had been rhetorical. Then he turned toward Mike, who now looked as bewildered as he felt. "Allow me to introduce myself," the man began, a friendly yet predatory smile spreading across his face. "Jonathan Reed, Chief of Police for this county." The words landed like a gong in the midst of a stunned silence. The crowd froze. Even a dog, previously barking happily at a child's feet, went quiet. Ike felt the blood drain from his face. He stood there, motionless, his expression a mix of confusion and dread. His lips moved, but his words stumbled out in fragments. Chief, I didn't know. I'm sorry for, The dynamic shifted in an instant. Those who had been cautiously observing now openly laughed. Someone in the crowd let out a loud guffaw, and a woman with a toddler even began clapping. "So you didn't know?" Jonathan asked, raising an eyebrow. His tone dripped with sarcasm. "Fascinating, officer. How do you perform your duties without recognizing your own superior? Or perhaps you might consider revising your priorities." Mike's face burned red, the embarrassment reaching all the way to his ears. The crowd roared with laughter, while the cap on Jonathan's head seemed to shrink under the spotlight of the moment. At that point, Mike decided he had to break the absurd tension. "Excuse me, Mr. Reed, but could you please explain what's actually happening here? Because I feel like I accidentally walked onto the set of a comedy show." Jonathan turned his gaze toward Mike and grinned even wider. "Oh, young man, you haven't even seen the funniest part yet." He spun around sharply to one of his associates. "Where's the parking report? I believe this gentleman's car isn't supposed to be here. Tell me, is breaking the rules your hobby or just a professional habit?" Mike froze as if he'd been struck by a bolt of lightning. The crowd erupted in fresh applause and laughter. For a brief moment, Mike felt like a spectator in a theater of the absurd, though he was beginning to enjoy the show. The scene reached its peak with the sound of loud, boisterous laughter and the astonished expression plastered on Mike's face. Meanwhile, Jonathan, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around him, calmly pulled out his phone and said, "It seems it's time to draw some conclusions." The crowd in the parking lot held its collective breath. The man in the red cap, now revealed to be Jonathan Reed, the county's chief of police, stood with a calmness that suggested this was just another day on his schedule. Taking the citation from Mike's trembling hand, he carefully tore it in half and said, "Officer, it seems you've forgotten that the law applies equally to everyone." Mike stood frozen, as if he'd been struck. His face was a mixture of shock and embarrassment. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. The growing silence only amplified his discomfort. Jonathan, however, remained poised. He added almost casually, "We'll discuss your conduct tomorrow. For now, I suggest you reflect on how you treat people." The crowd erupted into applause. Someone shouted, "Now that's a leader!" People began moving closer, many with phones in hand, eager to capture the moment. One onlooker quipped with a smirk. "Officer, you're definitely making history today." Mike, his face now as red as the infamous cap, mumbled, "Yes, sir. Understood, sir." Jonathan smiled slightly and nodded toward the gathering crowd. "Thank you all for your support. Now, let's each try to make today a little better than it started." The final punctuation of the scene came from a young man with a camera who shouted, "This is so going on YouTube. Check out my channel, Justice in Action." As Jonathan left the parking lot, the crowd dissolved into smiles and animated conversations. People marveled at how rare it was to witness such a clear moment of justice. Mike, meanwhile, remained rooted to the spot, acutely aware that this day would be etched in memory for a long time. "Well, that was a plot twist," someone muttered, giving Mike a friendly pat on the shoulder. Mike could only nod, swallowing the bitter taste of his own misjudgment. The video of the incident quickly went viral. Millions of views and thousands of comments poured in, praising the importance of equality under the law, and Jonathan's quick wit. Though Mike had been publicly humbled, the experience taught him a lesson that could transform not only his career, but also his attitude toward others.